Motram didn't advertise himself. Very few knew that he had received money for most of the murders he was responsible for. His assignments came from virtually a single source. He was tearing off the threads that weren't sewn properly into the fabric of Mr. Leonardo's plans. He dealt with minor incidents, such as having to dispose of an unarmed woman. Although this target was not involved in running the company, the information hunter said she may have heard things she shouldn't have, and that potential has led to elimination. Too bad. Motram didn't want any fuss. He and 3 of his men went after her to put a period at the end of the sentence. Eve was on her way home from a restaurant. She went there to have dinner from time to time. The dimly lit street was empty except for the garbage lying around. Eve was praying silently, unable to do anything else. She walked in horror. Right from the start, she was gripped tight by the fear of desolation. As many times before throughout her life, she was alone. She knew no relatives, and after her father's sudden death, she was staying at a friend's house as her house lay in ruins. It was a mistake to come on foot, she thought. She lost her mother at a young age, which created a long-lasting laceration on her soul. She had lived her life under the protection of her prosperous father, but the wings that protected her from confrontation were torn off by Death the Merciless. Instead of a safe nest, abruptly she found herself in the filth of the city, where she was confronted with rivals, unruly men, and criminals. Terror shuddered through her, almost paralyzing her limbs. Despite her naivety, she felt that the people behind her had malicious intent. She hurried on, searching for shelter as one of the shadows seemed to sway. She didn't even dare to think about what kind of violence they wanted to commit. She saw another man approaching, who was wrapped in a cloak. She was frightened at first, but then she recognized him. "Come with me," Eve said as she put her arm in his. She was immensely grateful for the man's presence. It was as if redemption had come to her in the shape of the cloaked figure who had once stood up for her in a restaurant where she went to lay low. "Oh, I'm glad to see you," the newcomer said. "Just walk next to me, please." "Greetings. Good to see you." Garaphor sensed the girl's terror and knew why she felt that way. He pretended to be cheerful, but he knew exactly whose ominous shadow was casted on the filthy pavement. They are not here to offer smuggled goods, Garaphor thought, and they are not just looking for adventure. Motram issued the order. The deadline is tight, he thought. Now they both have to die. We must strike at the right moment. It is unfortunate that she was escorted, but there wasn't much chance of this happening. We couldn't suspect it. At least the new guy will learn some. He will see more action. Action is needed. We go in, Motram decided. The gang, like peril itself, marched along the deserted street as they approached the girl. They surrounded the two people without a word, in perfect unison. They were dangerous, and they knew it. Well-deserved self-confidence passed through their bodies as they went after the prey. It didn't matter who was the one in the way, what they did or what they didn't do. It didn't matter why they had to be eliminated. The point was that the crew was paid, so the cleanup was about to begin. Motram wanted to wait for the right opportunity to attack. The man headed for the nearest doorway, wanting to ring. Damn it, he recognized us. But the girl knows nothing. If she knew, she would faint. How she trembles. Yet she releases the man's arm to not hinder him when we clash. Eve didn't understand why he was there, why the almost completely unknown man was doing this for her, but she was grateful for not having to face the danger alone. It doesn't matter now. They know we're coming, Motram thought. With a hand gesture, he instructed his companions to go with a melee weapon, while looking for the apprentice with his eyes to see if he understood. The attack began silently. There's no need to make a scene. A few stabs, muffled screams, and death makes a visit. A knife penetrates your heart, moving you to another plane of existence. The fight began. The clash of blades and protective gear created the sounds of the symphony of destruction. The two people started fighting for survival. Motram also set out to get into the fight. He was a little surprised. Noticeable resistance. He could even survive, but he loses time protecting the girl, so he is not sufficiently effective against a serious superiority. He stands no chance. Such calculations slipped through his mind in a split second. He didn't really make sentences out of them. There were 4 of them, but Garaphor moved so skillfully that somehow he always managed to prevent Eve and the knives from meeting. He kept his opponents on the ground. Motram became more and more irritated as he saw his assaults break one after another. He pulled a gun. Garaphor threw himself at the girl, dragging her to the ground. Shot rumbled. Pain flared up in Garaphor. His forearm was split open by a dagger. One of the attackers collapsed dead. He was the one hit by the bullet. Eve winced as the blood squirted on her dress. Motram was baffled for a moment. How was her guardian able to react so quickly? He looked at his dying companion in disbelief. Garaphor, taking advantage of the momentary confusion, stabbed his knife in the shoulder of a second man up to the hilt, then made a long cut on his upper body in a semicircular motion. He just wants to incapacitate them. He doesn't have time to kill, Motram recognized. He wanted to shoot, but he was afraid he would hit one of his own again. Meanwhile, he saw the man swing his leg as he continued to spin, and he felt himself hitting the ground. The gun was pulled out of his hand as if a magnet attracted it. The world was darkened before him twice by the sole of Garaphar's boot, but he had not completely lost consciousness. Motram managed to stab the winner when he lifted the fainted girl off the ground. Garaphor growled but went on. Leaving 4 motionless bodies behind, he limped into dark night. He couldn't shake off the thought of a strange anomaly he noticed. Who could have been the giant? There was a man who arrived with the attackers, but stood still the entire time. If he was a passerby, why didn't he run away? If he was with them, why didn't he fight? He just stood and watched. In his arms, Eve slowly recovered. What happened? Eve held her head as if in pain, even though only her thoughts were shattered. Garaphor put her on the ground. He walked so fast that sometimes she had to run to keep up. They attacked you, Garaphor explained. Their client obviously didn't know you were under my protection. Where are we going? To the car, Garaphor pointed out. About 200 meters. Did you chase them away by yourself? Eve shook her head, shying away from the man who had risked his life for her just a few minutes before. It's in my profession, Garaphor replied. Where do I take you? Where are you going? Do you have a place they can't find? Eve froze. Her voice was strange, uttering the words quite uncertainly, as if she had changed her mind several times while she spoke. What is your profession? Do you have any idea who sent them? Garaphor asked instead of answering. Do you have enemies? What do you do for a living? Eve demanded. I'm a bounty hunter, he finally admitted. Bounty hunter. Eve tasted the word. The hope that had previously promised her safety abandoned her. She felt a strong sympathy when she first saw the man, a pleasant feeling that settled in her ever since. In her situation, she needed security the most, and her intuition suggested she could get it from Garaphor. Although she had longed for a relationship, romantic thoughts were far from her at the time. Her inexperience made her more naive. She had no idea about the man's intentions. However, the revelation of the truth has drawn a black veil over their previously promising acquaintance. She was horrified by the morbid occupation and the thought of bloodshed. She felt her heart sink. "Thank you," she said, and started walking in another direction. She didn't understand how things could have turned so bad so suddenly. Eve was in the next room when her father, who was very influential, was killed. She directly witnessed the subsequent murder committed by Demolochis, the dreaded bounty hunter, and she saw him even without a helmet, and they talked on top of that. She thought she might be in danger, but not that she should be afraid for her life. She felt unfit to cope with the situation. She had to fight with all her might against the pressure on her chest and the sobbing that started to rise. She looked confused and desperate. Garaphor, obeying some kind of ancient instinct, took control. He took the delicate hand with a firm but careful motion and headed for his car. Eve didn't really know why, but she didn't pull her hand away. She let him lead her. The cramp in her throat began to subside. "I have to let my friend know," she said. Gar held the steering wheel, stared into the dark infinity beyond the headlights, driving away from the city where the lady sitting next to him was last sought after. He watched the road, the binocular shape lit by the headlights. He listened to the soothing hum of the engine. The car surrounded them as a protective armor. Only a flashing signal that meant a damaged generator was reminiscent of the problems of the outside world. Eve turned on the interior lighting, which Garaphor wasn't happy about. "Oh my god!" She looked at herself, trying to clean her blood-stained dress unsuccessfully. Gar couldn't keep himself from smiling. "Is that vanilla?" Eve asked. She frowned, sniffing after the pleasant smell. She turned off the light. "Perhaps," Garaphor smiled. He was glad she seemed to calm down. Either she endured the hardship well, or she didn't realize how much trouble she was in. "So you're a bounty hunter?" Eve returned to the conflict after some silence. "Yes, I am." Garaphor felt like it needed an explanation. At the same time, he tried to find an excuse. After some thought, he started to speak. "I have never seen my mother. My father raised me to honor and love, but in Arkney, these two ideas aren't held precious." He was stuck here for a few seconds, remembering a great deal of blood and torment. "My father was an engineer, overqualified for his job, significantly enough for someone to worry about him seeing a certain blueprints that were sent by mistake. One day a stranger came into our house and started accusing my father. Since then, I found he was working for Mr. Leonardo's company as an employee of one of the subcontractors. There was no reason to blame my father. Dad protested. The argument turned into a brawl. Garaphor watched the road. She sat silently, not sure if she wanted to hear the story or not. "I must have been around 10 years old," Garaphor continued. "All I could see was that the only one who was ever important to me is being beaten to death. I picked up a knife, jumped on the stranger's back and killed him. I stabbed the fillet knife in his neck from the side. I clearly remember blood being splattered everywhere. That was the first time I killed someone." He didn't have to look at the lady while talking during the drive. He opened up more easily if he didn't have to see the embarrassingly beautiful eyes, nor the reaction his words elicited from the girl. My father suffered a cranial fracture. He died a few days later. He didn't show much emotion while sharing his recollection. It wasn't difficult to become a bounty hunter with such a background. I ran away from the orphanage. I became a criminal to stay alive. And my conscience slowly subsided. It only awoke again when I was paid for it for the first time. Garaphor was pensive for a moment. Up to that point, I only ever killed when it was kill or be killed. He was rambling at this point. He felt he should stop soon. And here I am. My father instilled in me an interest in mechatronics, and I continue to learn by myself. It's easy to find information and learn nowadays, and I have to. My knowledge keeps me alive. Garaphor pulled over and got out. He bandaged the wound on his arm and began to strap on his armor. We have something in common. We both know what it's like to grow up without a mother, Eve said, while helping the man get suited. She tried to hide her astonishment as she laid eyes on the metal embedded in the man's skull. His right eye was replaced by cameras which reflected the moonlight. The implant made the otherwise handsome face grim. I'm sorry, said Garaphor. It was a result of my negligence. Never again. Eve was surprised she never noticed the metal before, but in the end it didn't matter. She didn't care much about looks. It turned out that Garaphor considered himself far too gone, but she had discovered traces of virtue in the man, and she felt it was not too late. Garaphor felt a deep attraction towards Eve. He became close with women many times and loved the feeling of being near them, but he always knew, if I ever have a child, it certainly won't be with her. He almost missed the reassuring feeling that he would lose nothing if it didn't work. He dropped the forearm guard from his hand, with which he had fumbled with until then. He hugged her, pulled her close. Eve snuggled up against the warrior. He was gently stroking the trembling girl. There was no candlelit dinner, no rainbow or pink clouds of cotton candy, only two lost souls. At least for a moment, they both found what they were in need of. Eve, deep in her soul, had been waiting for this moment since they got in the car. Still, she was a little worried because she had been warned of the dangers of sudden attraction. They stood in silence for a minute, then Gar released the girl and picked up the forearm guard from the ground. Motram, sitting with two men behind a container near a remote gas station, was waiting for Garaphor to arrive. He put on all his combat gear. He had a suit and could use it, but because he was incognito, he wore it only in the rarest of cases. When he let Garaphor go, he already knew this will be a rarest case. If I would have gotten up and kept fighting, he'd have turned around and killed me. He's a warrior. Finally! Motram was anxious about the deadline. I didn't think it would take so long to track them down. He watched Garaphor park. Alright, two people inside a custom car. Gar unfastened his seatbelt. Motram was looking intently. It's because he's constantly on the move. I have to say he's cunning. That's why I shouldn't pull the trigger for now. That dented wreck might resist explosions. They're 47 meters away. He read the laser rangefinder. When the woman opens the door, I fire. The rocket gets there by the time the chick gets out of the tank. To his dismay, the warrior got out first and immediately sent an infrared countermeasure from his raised arm just as Motram fired his weapon. Motram just laughed. The heat detector in self-guided missiles usually captures the infrared waves emitted by the target, and the system directs the missile to their source. Typically, the lithium phosphorus-powered cells used in machines similar to the tank and Garaphor's armor emit strong infrared waves. However, the electro-optical sensor of Motram's rocket detected the waves in multiple ranges of wavelength. This technology eliminates infrared interference, the sun's deflecting effect in case of an aerial target, and is also useful against objects that are difficult to detect with radar, such as targets using stealth technology. Motram smiled. His rocket flew steadily. "Get back in the car!" Garaphor shouted at the girl, but of course Eve didn't have time to obey. It was hardly possible to comprehend the sentence until the rocket crossed the 47 meters between them. The detonation occurred. People flung up in the air, punched by the invisible giant called Shockwave. Garaphor's flares weren't from mass production. In addition to the phosphorus charges, he also fired a series of tiny, unguided shrapnel grenades that, signaled by their motion sensors, exploded to activate the incoming weapon. Motram's men died, Motram and Garaphor were safe in their armor, and Eve was protected from serious injuries by the car between her and the explosion. It was not necessary for her to sit back before the rocket was activated. Motram cursed. Garaphor, meanwhile sprinting toward the attacker, pulled a weapon from his back. Motram charged angrily. He wanted to annihilate the man who had caused so much trouble. Garaphor opened fire before his opponent could send another missile. Motram returned the fire and slalomed to tear him apart. 40 meters separated them. They started from the two edges of the parking lot. They approached each other in an astounding speed, both cranking the system to a maximum. Eve thought in horror what might happen if they clashed at such a pace. But the momentum was broken when Garaphor opened fire. The two metal men came together violently into destructive contact. Garaphor lifted Motram and knocked him to the ground. He turned on his back and released a series of bullets into his opponent's face. Gar slammed the gun aside, then, short of a better idea, knelt to Motram and began punching his helmet. Motram kicked him off and jumped to his feet. Eve watched the fight from the car a few meters away. She was terrified by the jarring clanks and the thumps of the bodies audible even through insulation. Garaphor became a different man when he wore his armor. His demeanor changed. He was determined and precise. At that moment, Eve felt the man was born to kill. Motram pulled out a heavy hammer and hit Garaphor after a sidestep. Gar lost his balance. His armor was damaged during a previous fight, and the weapon shattered the deficient plate that was supposed to protect the middle back. Motram lifted the victim into the air with a two-handed upward blow. "It's over," Motram thought, and set off to finish with Garaphor, who had just plowed the concrete with his completely uncoordinated landing. No mercy. Everyone dies. The grenade came like an unexpected uppercut, approaching too fast to have time to defend. He couldn't have thrown with such a force. He didn't throw at all. While still in the air, he unhooked a rifle that had a grenade launcher attached, rose to his knees immediately after landing, and fired. Motram's feet no longer touched the ground, and his armor began to melt. He held himself upright by vigorous arm circling, recovering a good 10 meters from the car. "That's a problem. Damn the girl. I'll be glad if I survive." Such a hit was dangerous. His instruments went dark from the heat, the cameras stopped functioning. Thus, through the eye holes, he saw only the soles of Garaphor's outstretched legs, and then felt him leaning forward and stepping on his shoulders to pin him. The metal of the armrest squeaked as the spikes of the bendable soles wrapped around it. Motram tried to kick, but the captor didn't lose his balance. Bullets were ricocheting off his helmet. Motram was almost deafened by the explosions of the cartridges. His back arched against his will, then something snapped. He's tearing the armor off me. He was overwhelmed with terror and despair. He could barely see his opponent. He felt his strength leave him. He heard a constant whistle. He became disoriented. He found an ankle, slipped one foot off his arm, and punched blindly in despair. He was no longer thinking, just trying to get out of the grip of the invisible enemy with his body convulsing violently. His armor burned as if he was locked in an oven. The complex effects of pain completely overwhelmed his mind, making him unable to think sober. That's it. Through the ringing of his ear, he heard a distant voice, as if a woman with her last screams was trying to shout somewhere from the basement. Enough! Stop! Garaphor tried to dismantle the protective suit almost without anger. He searched for weak points as if he was trying to solve a logic puzzle. Tears rolled down on Eve's cheeks. She slapped the killer's back with her bare palm, but Garaphor couldn't notice. Her only achievement was that she hurt herself. It was dangerous to go near the metal man. Stop it! He can't hurt me anymore! She sobbed desperately. It was heartbreaking to see the ruthlessness and suffering. Garaphor instinctively jerked his hand to free himself from the girl's grip and would have reached to push her away. Eve grabbed Garaphor's wrist with both hands, trying to pull him away, but he was so stable she couldn't even move his arm. She could have just as well tried to pull a bronze statue. Garaphor watched in surprise. Only visual clues let him know what she was trying to do. Motram lay motionless, panting. He was happy to be able to do it. Garaphor slowly sobered, started limping toward the car. Garaphor didn't really know why, but he didn't pull his hand away. He let her lead him. She was still crying. She didn't want to look there, but she couldn't avoid the sight of Motram's man lying dead. Motram tried to compose himself. He was able to see again. The cameras cooled down to operating temperatures. He detected the bounty hunter and the girl getting into the vehicle. What kind of woman is this? We wanted to kill her. Motram only knew mercy from the dictionary. He never had the good fortune to experience it before. Why would she do this? He asked himself. And what do I do now? He was so reconciled with his death that he couldn't really imagine a future. He got up as soon as his servos began to function again. Every movement hurt because of his burns. He couldn't hear the words in the armored vehicle, though he would have been very interested in how she justified her actions. But he wouldn't have been happy even if he could have listened to the conversation. It was natural for her to do what she did, so she didn't explain it at all. How could you do that? The lady was still sobbing, her voice hoarse, strangled by convulsive crying. I don't know, Garaphor replied, staring into the nothingness. I don't know, the bounty hunter repeated.